Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to be sharing the stage with such incredible advocates for women. It's really amazing. Before I start, could we please have another round of applause for Katie? Where'd Katie go? She's over there. For Katie and her bravery. You know, I think that it's really young women like her who are sharing their stories and speaking up, who are not just opening up the national conversation around abortion, but who are really propelling the movement forward. So thank you, Katie, for sharing your story and for being so brave. As all of us here in this room know, NARAL Pro-Choice America has been fighting for women's health and reproductive rights for years, but as we've heard over the last few months, they've really had their work cut out for them. Because attacks from anti-choice activists aren't just dangerous anymore. They're starting to border on the completely absurd. As we heard about cows. I didn't heard that one before. That's absurd. Anti-choice legislators are no longer satisfied with run-of-the-mill abortion restrictions like waiting periods and consent laws. They want to make sure that if abortion isn't illegal, that it's completely impossible to obtain. And they're not above cheap stunts and ridiculous legislation to make sure that that happens. Earlier this month, some of you may have heard about this, an anti-choice organization in Ohio made headlines when they had a 9-week-old fetus testify before the state's health committee. Yeah. Basically what they did was they brought in a pregnant woman to be given a public ultrasound so the image and heartbeat could be projected onto a screen. Yeah. Unfortunately, after 15 minutes of the ultrasound technician kind of fumbling around, the heartbeat was barely audible and the stunt failed. So sadly, the fetus was unable to make an appearance that day. But what I thought was particularly telling and really true to their cause, the pregnant woman remained silent throughout. A bill proposed in Georgia last month was similarly ridiculous. Now, this bill didn't just seek to outlaw abortion, why aim so low after all, but would also mandate that women who have miscarriages be investigated by the police to make sure that there was, quote, no human involvement whatsoever. Women whose miscarriages were found to be suspect could face life in prison or the death penalty for suspect miscarriages. Now, I know, setting aside the public policy question, if you've ever known anyone who has had a miscarriage, then you know how absolutely disgusting it is to ask that in the middle of this personal crisis and an emotional time, that women should have to worry about whether or not they could face jail time because of a personal tragedy. All of this absurdity, of course, is really overshadowed by the continued disregard for women's rights and lives. Bills proposed in South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa, for example, would actually make it legal to kill abortion providers. And I'm just going to let that sink in a second. They would make it legal to kill abortion providers. By making murder in defense of a fetus justifiable homicide, this law would paint a target on the back of every provider in those states. And as we all know, these are doctors and healthcare advocates who already put their lives at risk every day simply by providing safe, legal, and much-needed services for women. And these bills are blithely introduced as if their lives mean nothing. And as Nancy already mentioned, in South Dakota, there's a lot going on in South Dakota these days. Governor Dennis Dugard signed the most sweeping anti-choice legislation in the country last week. Women who need abortions will not only be forced to visit a crisis pregnancy center, which, as most of us know, are biased organizations that rely on deception and false medical information to scare women, but they'll also be forced to wait 72 hours before even being able to schedule the procedure. I think it's worth noting here that women in South Dakota are going to have to wait 72 hours before getting an abortion, but there's no waiting period to buy a gun. The governor in South Dakota says he hopes women considering abortions will, quote, use this 3-day period to make good choices, as if we were unruly children in need of a timeout. Perhaps most horrific, though, and both Nancy Keenan and Leader Pelosi mentioned this, is the ironically named Protect Life Act, which was introduced in the House. And this is the law that they mentioned that would allow hospitals to refuse women abortions even if they need one to save their life. But it goes a little even further than that. The hospital wouldn't even have to transfer the patient to another facility that would provide an abortion. They could simply sit there and watch her die, and that would be legal. This law hasn't even passed, and already providers who are saving women's lives are paying the price. When a hospital administrator in Arizona, who also happened to be a nun, okayed an abortion for a 27-year-old mother of 4 who would have died without it, she was excommunicated, and the hospital lost its standing as a Catholic institution. And this is what really gets me. They're not even pretending anymore that they care about women's lives. Now, this particular bill, or any legislation really that suggests that women don't really need abortions to save their lives or protect their health, hits close to home for me. This past summer, I was just 28 weeks pregnant when, during a routine visit to my OB, I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. For those of you who don't know what preeclampsia is, it's a pregnancy complication that makes your blood pressure dangerously high. It's also a leading cause of death of pregnant women in the United States. This is the first time I've talked about this, sorry. Even though I was admitted to the hospital within minutes, my husband and I kind of held out hope that it was all a big fluke and that I'd be going home the same day. There was really no mistaking, though, the look on my doctor's face after she took my blood pressure for the 3rd time. And I can tell you, there is nothing scarier than having the hospital's chief OB walk in while you're strapped to kind of multiple tubes and wires and breathing machines, to tell you that 3 months before your due date that you will not be leaving the hospital until you give birth, whether that happens to be in weeks or in hours. For me, unfortunately, it was just days. Within 48 hours of being admitted to the hospital, I developed a second complication called HELP syndrome, which put my liver in danger of failing. I was rushed into an emergency C-section, and after an extended surgery because of how early I was, I gave birth to my daughter Layla, who was born weighing 2 pounds. I caught a fleeting glimpse of her before the doctors rushed her off to the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. But it was hardly the joyous experience of having my first child that I expected, as you can imagine. It would be a full 24 hours before I was well enough to go see her, and almost a week before I was allowed to touch her or to hold her. Despite all of this, I was very, very, very lucky. I recovered fully, and after 8 weeks in intensive care, Layla came home. And she came home at 4 pounds, which doesn't seem like a lot, but to us it was like huge. Like, she's 4 pounds. Thanks. And I'm happy to say that now, 7 months later, she's a healthy handful. She's more than a handful. She's a monster, basically, but I love it. Despite the challenges and the sleep deprivation that come with having a new baby, nothing really phases me anymore. Even changing dirty diapers puts a smile on my face these days. Now, I have no illusions about how fortunate I was. If I had gotten ill a month or so earlier, I could have been faced with having to terminate my pregnancy to save my life. It's the nightmare scenario that I really don't let myself imagine ever. I'm incredibly grateful that I did not have to face that reality, that I wasn't sick earlier, that I had access to doctors who respected me, a family that supported me, and probably most importantly, insurance that paid for it all. Too many women aren't as lucky, and this onslaught of anti-choice legislation and action ignores the reality of their lives. The people who attack reproductive rights are turning a blind eye to the impossible choices families have to make together, instead callously insisting that it's lawmakers who know what's best for women instead of women themselves. And of course, the anti-choice movement is not just emotionally clueless, they're entirely disconnected to what American families want and need. We want access to affordable, easy-to-obtain reproductive health care. This is not just a reasonable expectation. It's a human right. And that's why I'm so glad today to be here with some of the heroes that fight every day to ensure that American women and their families have access to that right. Because while the other side is busy with stunts like testifying fetuses and criminalizing miscarriages, the heroes in this room will be doing the real work of helping women, supporting families, and treating these issues with the care and respect and the seriousness that they deserve. The reality, of course, is that this battle is being fought in every community and every state, and we know what we need to do. We have to continue to support the incredible work of organizations like NARAL Pro-Choice America, but most importantly, we have to continue to foster the activism of young women who, like Katie, are active, engaged, and ready to take on the fight. And I have to tell you, they are already fighting hard. They are. There are women like Steph Harold, who founded the website I Am Dr. Tiller to honor the murdered abortion provider. Steph recently started a Twitter campaign that had thousands of young women talking about their abortion experiences and calling and writing their legislators to let them know that they would not stand for the rollback of their reproductive rights. There are women like the college students I meet from New York to Tennessee who are fighting for birth control in their campus health centers, educating and organizing their peers, and battling back against anti-choice groups who are better funded and more supported by college administrators, all to ensure that the next generation of pro-choice advocates are fully informed, active, and empowered. And I mention these young people just to make the point that not only is the pro-choice movement alive and well, but that it's innovative, energized, and that it's increasingly youth-led. And while these young women are doing amazing things all on their own, without a doubt, they still need our help and they need our support, but most importantly, they need our recognition. We can help build the generation that will put an end to this absurdity, so that when my daughter grows up, she'll be living in a world where this fight is long over, a world where she can happily think about having children of her own, knowing that she'll be raising them in a country that respects all women's rights to reproductive justice and bodily autonomy. I know that this kind of world and that this kind of country is possible for her and for all of our daughters. I sincerely hope that you'll help us get there. So thank you once more to NARAL Pro-Choice America for all of their brave and necessary work. Thank you.